We're going to, again, yes, welcome them. We're going to begin with Ms. Washington. If you take about 8 to 10 minutes and tell us about the situation.
Good evening. My name is Viola Francois Washington, and I'm the Executive Director of the Welfare Rights Organization, better known as the Women's Rights Organization. And in that organization, what we do, we really fight for issues that, for families who've been left out, especially with the Road Home program. We organized a group right after Katrina to fight Road Home, to make sure that families was made whole again, and that the policies would be changed so that people could get what they were supposed to have. And we worked really hard to make sure that happened. And we was able to get a lot of help for families. And we know there was a lot of families that was left out of it, but we was able to get a lot of help for families, got them back into their homes, and especially in the Ninth Ward, where we was left out of the whole plan in the beginning, before we entered. So I really want to hear from the people from the state to see what they have to say, because where we left off is that the state allowed for us to develop a program in the community called a case management program, where we was able to really help a lot of families. And they gave us like 2 years to do it. At the end of the 2 years, there was still a lot of people left out, but we did get a chance to help a lot of families. So at that time, they said there was no more money left. And so I really want to hear from them to see what is available to the community, so we can know how we need to go after this money.
Ms. Viola, before you pass the mic, just a question for you. Do you feel, in your estimation and from what you have seen, that there have been other people that have received funds and that those that you have worked with have been passed over or looked over in this situation?
Oh yes, there was a lot of discrimination in this program. We tried to go after that too, but we could not find an attorney who would really fight for it, because what it was all wrong, but it was not illegal the way they did it. But it was all wrong. The whole program was wrong. But somehow they found a way to make it legal to do this. So that was the big problem.
So who was helped? And
Well,
who was
in
not?
Metairie, they got a lot of money there. And Metairie got the least amount of damage. They got wind damage, but no flood. But they received the monies first, and they got most of the money. And the whole $150,000, they received it. And we had the same property in a different area, but did not receive the same amount of money. And like people say, supplies cost the same, regardless of where you live, but we did not get the same amount of money. Our property was devalued, and when other properties was not. So we had a real serious problem with that. And we fought with the state for a long time. And I would just want to say that you should have M.A. Sheehan up here, because she was one of the people that I worked with, and that we did a lot of work together to try to bring this back home.
Yes. Thanks, Ms. Viola. And you're correct. Ms. M.A. Sheehan will have her chance up here too, because this is just the beginning. It's only a beginning, so it's an opening to a better future maybe for all of us. So yes, she will be up here. And one question I wanted to ask you, could you explain the difference between Road Home Mitigation and the Elevation Funds? They're all the same, right?
Well, it was all the same, but there was different parts of money. I'm sure this gentleman can explain that.
Okay.
There was different parts of money. The Road Home, the Elevation was like an afterthought, and was money that was sent to family without telling them what it was for. And then when family used that money, then they would come back on them and say that you owe us this money, because that $30,000 was only for elevation, but it was not explained.
Thank you.
Ms. Washington, is there anything else further you want to add?
No, maybe after I hear what the gentleman's asking.
Okay, very good. All right, can we just continue with Mr. White? Mr. White, would you give us your presentation? Yeah, I think in reference to what Ms. Viola was saying, I think that'd be helpful.
All right, well, Thank you for having me here today. My name is Sean Wyatt. I'm with GOSEP, which is the Governor's Office of Homeland Security and Emergency Preparedness. Sure, I can speak a lot louder. With GOSEP, yes, Governor's Office of Homeland Security and Emergency Preparedness. So I've been with GOSEP since 2007. And I have quite a varied background with GOSEP. Unfortunately, I had very limited background with the Road Home program. I started in 2007 in public assistance, which are grants awarded to public entities in the aftermath of a disaster. So in 2007, when I began, it was primarily Katrina and Rita that the state was facing back then. In 2012, I transitioned to our preparedness division after Hurricane Isaac. Not sure how many are familiar with that disaster. That was one that impacted Plaquemines Parish as well as St. John Parish. 2015, I moved to our Grants and Administration Division, where I worked for 3 years, and in February of this year, 2018, I moved over to Hazard Mitigation. So with that being said, I can present information tonight on opportunity for future grant cycles. What I can't speak to are decisions that were made by previous administrations and what happened in the past. So I'd be delighted and happy to share information with you about new funding cycles and talk about hazard mitigation assistance, if that's okay with you all. So under what's called the HMA programs, or hazard mitigation assistance programs, there are 3 primary hazard mitigation grant programs. The first being HMGP, which is the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program. And I think that's what many of you may be familiar with when you talk road home, elevations, OCD, etc. Those funds are awarded to a state immediately after a disaster. The unfortunate thing is, in order for the state to access those funds, those resources, it does take a presidentially declared natural disaster. That's the only way that that funding can be made available to a state. The last HMGP award that the state of Louisiana received was in 2017 after Tropical Storm Harvey, I believe, that impacted the western part of the state and really impacted Texas. Prior to that, it was the floods in 2016. Fortunately, on an annual or competitive basis, there are 2 additional grant programs. The first being PDM, that's pre-disaster mitigation, and the second being flood mitigation assistance. Now, unlike the HMGP, those are competitive grant programs. That means they're open to all states and territories to apply for on an annual basis. And the amount set aside for each grant program is based on a congressional appropriation. For this fiscal year, 2018, FEMA appropriated $235 million for PDM. And for FMA, I believe the number is $160 million. Now, there are fact sheets that you can access on FEMA.gov that talk a little bit more about the particular grant programs, PDM and FMA. But like I mentioned, they're competitive. Now, who's eligible as an applicant for those grant programs? You may be wondering that as a homeowner, right? So the state, in our case, Louisiana, and GOSEP on behalf of the state, is the applicant or the grantee. So GOSEP can apply for these funds. And all parishes and local municipalities are eligible as sub-applicants. So they would submit their applications to the state for review, and the state would submit to FEMA. So where do you fall in as a homeowner? The homeowner has to apply for or reach out and coordinate with their local parish for participation into one of these grant programs. Unfortunately, I can't speak to the criteria and the priorities that the city of New Orleans has established for the grant programs, but I can share contact information with the city of New Orleans. Would you like that now? Okay, sure. So the hazard mitigation administrator for the city of New Orleans is a gentleman named Ryan Mast. That's M-A-S-T. If you give me a second, I can get his desk number. But he can certainly speak with any of you at great length about the process it takes to get involved with one of these grant programs. And it's 504-658-8740. And he works for the New Orleans Office of Homeland Security and Emergency Preparedness. So he's the NOSEP, the GOSEP with an N, right? GOSEP, Governor's Office, he's the New Orleans Office of Homeland Security and Emergency Preparedness. So homeowners are eligible sub-recipients for these elevation awards. Elevation is a mitigation activity or a mitigation type that's eligible under the PDM or the FMA. FEMA.gov, I don't know if I mentioned that, but that's a great resource for additional information on the grant programs. Also, there's guidance that's been issued by FEMA. It's the HMA guidance of 2015. That's Hazard Mitigation Assistance Guidance of 2015. And it lists for the three programs that I mentioned, HMGP, PDM, and FMA, the mitigation project types that are eligible. And I imagine a lot of you all are interested in either an elevation, a reconstruction, or an acquisition. By show of hands, would that be pretty accurate? Pretty accurate. Well, all three of those mitigation activities are eligible types under the programs. Now, that doesn't mean you'll necessarily be approved if you submit an application, but at least it's an opportunity. It starts the wheels in motion. And again, it's ultimately the city of New Orleans that's going to identify their mitigation priorities and their mitigation strategy and submit projects to the state for consideration to FEMA for approval. Does that help? Okay.
Mr. Hebert, could you shed some light on the situation and what those present can do to be made whole?
Well, we first start with, we're a law firm, basically, and I'm an attorney. So we come in, and I have represented some people who have had issues, well, they've been sued by the state or OCD for various problems with their road-owned grant or elevation grant or whatever. We don't, because of our funding, we're funded by the Legal Services Corporation. We can't advocate in terms of what y'all do. We can't go to the legislature and try to change laws, but we really have to concentrate on the individual homeowner who has an individual problem with some of these different programs. We service, right now, you may remember our original organization was called NOLAC, the New Orleans Legal Assistance Corporation. We're now 22 parishes, all the way through Baton Rouge, all the way up to across the lake to Mississippi and Tahoma and St. Bernard and Plaquemines. We have our eligibility for assistance is based upon both income and assets. It doesn't matter what we're pretty much eligible. Income is based on federal poverty guidelines. We go up to 20% of poverty. We can have some deductions to make you eligible, but we're limited in what we can do. We also have some asset eligibility issues as well. So we try to help as many people as we can. We are limited through that, and also we're limited to our funding as well.
So, if people want to be made whole and need to want to access the funds that they did not receive, can they get a hold of your office?
Well, we have different organizations. They can certainly contact our office, and at the very least, I can put them in contact with other organizations that may have more expertise. Unfortunately, we're not proactive. We're reactive in terms of these issues. And that's mainly because we just don't have the funding to go out and some of we were prohibited from doing some things, but going out into helping people with the their problems up front, it's more when they get sued. But doesn't mean you can't contact us and speak to us, and certainly, at least I can speak for myself, I'm the managing attorney of the consumer unit, where this would fall into play. I certainly give the information as much as possible if everybody contacts me.
I have 2 questions so far, so let me remind you, if you have questions, please write them and submit them into the bucket so we can have your questions asked. The first question is not addressed to anybody particularly. It says, is it correct that the city has a deadline to use FEMA money to address the municipal auditorium?
Sure, I'll address that very succinctly, and then I have some other points I'd like to make about mitigation if I could.
Please do.
The municipal auditorium, I believe that's a project funded under the public assistance program, which is outside of my purview. I'm over hazard mitigation assistance, so I can't answer that with a yes or a no. I do know though, like all grant programs, there are periods of performance within which an eligible applicant has to expend, federal funds, but I do not know when that period of performance is for that particular grant. Now, as far as the hazard mitigation programs are concerned, I would like to instill just a little bit of confidence in the crowd, if I could, in the audience. I mentioned competitive, and that may give some of us some angst, right? Competition. But last year, in fiscal year 2017, for the flood mitigation assistance program, FEMA Region 6, which is comprised of Louisiana, Arkansas, Texas, Oklahoma, and New Mexico, those 5 states. Region 6 was awarded $96 million of the FMA, the Flood Mitigation Assistance allocation for fiscal year 2017. And I believe the total allocated was $160 million. So we received roughly 100 of that $160 million in the 5 states that make up Region 6. Louisiana was the recipient of $56 million of that $96 million. To put it into perspective, second place in Region 6 was our neighbor to the west, Texas. They received $20 million. So we received nearly 3 times the second highest state recipient in FMA last year. Now what does that say? One, we had a lot of projects, a lot of mitigation activities, a lot of eligible project types, a lot of great ideas that we can put to paper that meet the basic mitigation criteria. For a project to be eligible, it has to be technically feasible, and it has to meet a benefit cost analysis, which means the benefits received have to exceed the costs of that project. So if I'm going to invest, say, $200,000 into the elevation of a home, the benefits received have to exceed that $200,000. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Those are the 2 main criteria for eligibility. HNGP, again, is the non-competitive program, but unfortunately, that money is only, like I said, available in the aftermath of a disaster. And we aren't certainly hoping for or wishing for any more disasters. So it's uncertain as to when that funding will be made available again. But at least annually, we have 2 other grant programs that we can tap into. And recent history shows that Louisiana has had quite a bit of success in tapping into those federal dollars.
Mr. White, real quickly, you mentioned, of course, we don't want another disaster to happen, but we know that could possibly, most likely be the case. How do folks here need to prepare in terms of being prepared in a situation where they're able to receive those funds that are necessary to rebuild?
Well, personal preparation and receiving grant funds after the fact are 2 different things, right? So if I could put my emergency preparedness hat on for a second, I mentioned I was in the operations section after Isaac for a couple of years. We actively pitch what's called Get a Game Plan. Is anybody familiar with the Get a Game Plan campaign that GOSEP has put out? If you all have internet access, GOSEP, gohsep.la.gov. That's gohsep.la.gov. Lots of great information on hazard mitigation grants, public assistance grants, emergency preparedness, emergency response, family preparedness, and personal preparedness. But preparing for the next disaster is, like you suggested, it's not a matter of if, but when. From a personal standpoint, there are things you can do to ensure that you're home and you are taken care of immediately before and during a disaster. And the preparedness side of me says, have a game plan, have meals ready for 72 hours, have water available for 72 hours, be prepared to self-sustain, for 72 hours. Heed the warnings of your elected officials. That's another thing we can do to prepare. And the last important thing is make sure you document. You cannot over-document. Coming from the grant world, I can say that you cannot over-document. Have before pictures, during pictures, after pictures. Insurance. Insurability is a big thing as well. And unfortunately or fortunately, however you want to look at it, once that home is elevated, that structure is elevated, the annual premium as part of the NFIP, the National Flood Insurance Program, should go down. That's one of the carrots that's dangled in the program. Yes, there may be a cost to the homeowner, and it may be what's considered a significant cost, but hopefully, over time, there's savings that are realized on the deductions and the drop in that insurance premium. And that's one thing I did fail to mention in the grant programs. In HMGP, which again is the non-competitive, disaster-dependent grant program, there's a cost share, a non-federal cost share associated with that grant, and it's at least 25%. And typically, the homeowner bears that responsibility in the HMGP program. So that means for every $100,000 that's spent, the homeowner is responsible for $25,000. Now, there are some things that can be done to help offset that. Insurance was mentioned as one of them. Increased cost of compliance through your insurance is another one. ICC allows for a $30,000 grant to elevate or mitigate after disaster. But unlike the HMGP, with the FMA or the PDM program, there is opportunity for decreased non-fed cost share. So if you have a house that is designated as repetitive loss or severe repetitive loss, depends on how it meets the definition of each, the way each one of those is defined, your cost share can be reduced to 10% or 0%. 0% is good, right?
Right.
No liability. And that would take an SRL, or a severe repetitive loss, property.
Thank you, Mr. White.
The next question is from Mr. White. Given that PDM, FMA are competitive between states, can you tell us what funding is currently available to New Orleans residents for these programs?
I can. So we have several different grant cycles that are still open from prior fiscal years. The most recent fiscal year, 2017, the city of New Orleans was awarded $12 million and some change for elevation reconstruction type projects. Now, one caveat to mention with hazard mitigation is in order for a project to be eligible under one of the programs, it has to be identified during the application period. So the FY17 application period is already closed. So that means all projects that were pre-identified have been selected and awarded. For fiscal year 2018, which we're currently in, the application period opens October 1st and closes January 31st of 2019. So that 4-month window, 90-day to 4-month window, give or take, is the window within which all eligible sub-applicants, your cities of, your parishes, your municipalities, have to submit all project applications to GOSEP for consideration for funding. So there is opportunity for the next fiscal year, should New Orleans identify, prioritize, and select certain properties. And again, I'm not sure of their selection and prioritization process. Now, we are limited by Stafford Act. I mentioned competitive. For PDM, we're limited to 15% of the allocation as an applicant. There is no limitation for FMA.
Next question, will our levies hold if there's another 100-year storm?
I don't see a representative from the Army Corps up here. That's an Army Corps question. They were designed and built for that. Let's hope and pray that they do. Yes, sir.
Next question. What happens if we get hit with another storm? Do we have a chance of being covered?
First thing I would ask is, are you insured? That's the first thing we can do as individuals to help alleviate some of those losses, help reduce some of the disaster loss, right? Insurance. And I understand we get into some affordability issues and concerns. Second part of that was, are we covered? Insurance will cover you. A grant is an opportunity to come in after the fact and elevate, reconstruct, and really is a measure to fill the gaps, right? So insurance is designed to make you whole again, and if there are any grant monies received, before any federal funding is awarded, it's going to take insurance proceeds into consideration. So if you're the recipient of insurance, they're going to reduce that out of the federal award because that's known as a duplication of benefit. So if the grant is for $150,000 and you receive $100,000 in insurance, you'll be eligible for a $50,000 reward in simple terms. Insurance is the way to go.
Afford it.
If you can afford it, yes, ma'am.
Will cell phone pictures of your documents be okay if we have to evacuate?
Maybe Mr. Abrams, you gonna respond to that?
Yeah, you can definitely use that in court and any other thing. It's no different than a regular camera. And I've done that myself. And it's a quick and easy way to do it. And then if you have your phone with you when you evacuate, you have your pictures as well. Now, I just also want to add something to the question before about insurance. And I'm just about flood insurance, and that's most of what we're talking about here. Is just because your house or maybe your mortgage is paid, so the mortgage company is not requiring the flood insurance, or because of the new flood maps, you are at a much lower level, you don't need to have flood insurance, does not mean you still can't buy flood insurance. And I see a lot of clients of mine come in, and that's one of the things we kind of talk about is reminding them that you still can, because it's, and this means it's a lot cheaper too, because the flood maps have changed, and so the reduced rate. So, you know, it's important to remember, just because you are not required to do it, you still can purchase flood insurance.
If you're in a flood zone A, which is the worst, will you get priority?
In terms of buying the flood insurance?
No, definitely don't get priority, because it costs more for you.
If there's a loss, and then,
with the
I
grants.
don't know that answer. Maybe you,
Because if you have insurance, you're gonna use your insurance. If you don't have enough, you are penalized, they don't give you any money. So it's good to have insurance for your own personal, but you don't get that much money from FEMA or Road Home for having insurance.
Right. Is there money available for community education for hazard, I guess this is hazardous mitigation?
Community education outreach?
Yes.
Yes, through PDM.
Okay.
Let me check my fact sheet. Yes, through PDM, and I believe, the city of New Orleans has done some work in that regard. And we'll have some new CEO, community education outreach, which is risk awareness type stuff, very soon.
Thank you. Okay, if I wanted to get my house elevated, what would I have to do?
Who asked that question? So, if you'd like to get your house elevated, was that the question? So let me ask, with FEMA or in the absence of FEMA? In the absence of FEMA, you select a contractor and get it elevated. With FEMA, lots of strings, right? It takes, first of all, you would have to fill out a voluntary participation agreement form. You'd have to get with the city of New Orleans. We call it a VPA form. You'd have to get with the city of New Orleans, or conversely, they'd have to get with you to initiate the process. And it's quite a process. From the time that you initiate the paperwork side of things, the VPA forms and other forms, until the grant is actually federally funded where construction can begin, could be as long as 18 months or so. Just to try to set expectations, right? It's not quick. So the forms would have to be signed. You'd have to work with the parish. They would submit all of your information on your behalf as part of their project sub-application to the state. The state would then review to ensure that it was a complete package, that it was technically feasible, cost-effective, it was aligned with the priorities outlined in the fact sheets that FEMA issues for their non-competitive grant for their competitive grant programs, and that application would be submitted for review. Now, I mentioned we have an October 1st through January 31st application time frame, right? So let's use it for instance. If you were eligible in this open or this current funding cycle, and you filled out the VPA form today, that form would have to be then submitted with all of the other backup documentation between now and January 31st. FEMA begins their review of all submitted applications and will select or reject applications, usually within 90 days, identify for further review, reject because they don't meet the requirements, and the requirements being technically feasible, cost-effective, etc. Usually within 90 days of application period close. So that puts us in March, April, June-ish of 2019. Once they're identified for further review, they undergo what's called the request for information. There could be more information that's needed. Then they'll go to federal funding award. So it could be up to a year before the obligation is realized. And the caveat with hazard mitigation is construction cannot commence until the award has been approved, or the project has been approved.
In our experience with elevation is that the $30,000 that you receive, if you receive $30,000, those are the ones that they will pay attention to if you come to them for elevation. But that $30,000 has to be paid back. If you spend it, it has to be given to the contractor. So you also have to use a state contractor. If you want to use your own contractor, you're disqualified. And they have their own contractors. And we had some serious problems with the contractors. There's a lot of lawsuits that's out there on contractors. There's a lot of contractors who have lawsuits against families. They have liens on families' homes because of that $30,000. And some came in and said, we will sign a promissory note and you don't have to pay. That is so they can get the other $100-some thousand from the state to elevate your home. In the beginning, it was giving $30,000 to elevate your home. So why was it giving $30,000 when it came out to elevate your home, it cost $100-some thousand. But it was only given to those special contractors. And we had so much problem, I'm telling you, with the contractors, because they belong to the state. they work with the state, and they work against you because they're gonna get that money. Now, I didn't realize that they had elevation money available. Do they have elevation money available now? Let's see. Mhm.
So, a lot of what you spoke to just now is unique to the road home or the OCD HMGP program. For all grants since and all future grants, the homeowner can select the contractor they choose to do business with. From a procurement and a cost reasonableness standpoint, many parishes and cities request / may require, again, I don't know because I represent the state, may request or require that the homeowner obtain 3 bids to determine, 1, reasonableness, and 2, to ensure that you're getting the most bang for your buck. Now remember, for some of these grant programs, there could be a cost share involved, so it would behoove the homeowner to try to keep costs low, because that means less out-of-pocket expenses for the homeowner. And as far as grant funds available, there's opportunity come October 1st for grant funding to be made available to all 50 states and territories, so yes. Not specifically elevations, but for hazard mitigation. And elevation is an eligible activity type, yes. Yes.
Thank you both. Just one quick question. I wanted to make sure I got to Mr. Aver. Do you have any issues or challenges that you've run across with the issue of elevation you want to speak to?
I've seen, and we represent some people that, in a similar situation Ms. Washington talked about, who have gotten sued by contractors, elevation contractors, over a $30,000 promissory note. Those lawsuits are going on. There's dozens, if not hundreds of them. That's what I do. We represent people in defense of those. And I also would add that there is a local TV station that has contacted our office, and we've spoken to them. They're looking into this issue. Hopefully they'll have a story on it in the near future. So I expect them to have it up. It takes a little time.
All right, thank you.
Thanks. Mr. Wyatt, my question was, when she asked about state funds, well, when I heard that there was a $300 million surplus that would be only designated to certain chosen projects and parishes, that's still discrimination. So the main thing is, we have people steady suffering and persevering, but we really asking, do the government hear us? Do they hear us? And we're only asking for what is just due to us. So when we called this here forum, I called it mainly as well for my mom, because I was trying to get the full understanding. When you have received the $30,000 mitigation funds, that was what you were supposed to elevate your home with? That's what you're saying? Okay, so the $30,000, what was that? Mitigation funds, correct?
Again, that was circa 2005, 6, 7, which preceded my time in hazard mitigation. As I can appreciate it, it was called a road home elevation incentive. Now, I'm not sure what that money was intended to do or what it was to be used for. And then there were modifications or additions, enhancements, additional funding allocated to the program to increase that to X number of dollars. And again, I'm not sure what that was. But if you were the recipient of the 30,000 RHEI, you may have been subject to that reduction, and future award is a duplication of benefit.
Thank you. And not to badger you or anything, but I'm trying to really have some hope in what you're telling me within the time limit of October the 1st of this year to January 2019 to see if we qualify for any more funds. So, I mean, it's really not leaving hope, but we will try every avenue that you will continue to give us. We are not the type of people that give up easy. Thank you.
Understood.
Somebody asked a question that's kind of similar to yours. Why did Jefferson Parish get all that money and New Orleans did not?
Yeah, I'm not sure.
That's another top issue. It was granted to Jefferson Parish last year, the end of December. And it's a slap in the face. Especially when you hear over and over again someone saying to their friend, oh, they keep sending me the checks and I keep sending them back, but they keep sending me the checks. It's not right.
Maybe you could best refer us to who could answer that question. I know
I'm
that's
not
not
sure
your office.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm not even sure what program you're referring to with that.
All right.
Was it grant funds that were received, or?
Yes. Yes.
There was checks coming in people's mailboxes, and people didn't even live in their homes. And there was checks coming into the mailboxes for $30,000. And families used that money, because what we did, the grant program, what we did, we made sure that the money was used for repairs. We made sure that $30,000 was used for repairs and not elevation, because it was not enough for what the contract was charged for elevation.
Thank you.
I'd like to add to that, as discussed, the RHEI, the Road Home Elevation Incentive Grant, which is the $30,000. And MA certainly knows a lot about this. A couple of years ago, we, through MA and other organizations, created this unmet needs program where people who may have received that grant and could not elevate and many people did not get enough money from the regular road home grant, and use that money to renovate their house. Through the unmet needs, working with HUD and working with the state, they were able to reclassify that money so that they could be made in compliance with the road home program. So, and the other thing, some of your questions that we've heard, you have to remember, we're on our third governor since this initial program started. And these programs have changed. The good news is, with unmet needs, the state, with conjunction with a lot of organizations, went to HUD and were able to change that provision so they can make people who lost their money through contractor fraud or had to use that road home money to pay for their housing needs. And it was able to make them compliant with the program. So my dealings with the state on that aspect and with working with different organizations was the state would try as much as possible to make the homeowner compliant. Some cases it was impossible. I mean, some people, unfortunately, took the money and ran, and that happened. But the people who tried to do what they were supposed to do with it, most of those people, a lot of people did get assistance to make themselves through the unmet needs program. So just got to remember, we got, and as Mr. Sykes was discussing about different, the pot of money he's talking about now is a new program. And it sounds like to me, you really have to get with, I forget the name, with the state, New Orleans office. That's where you all need to be focusing on. I think Mr. Mass, right? So.
And also, Viola was part of people who got that unmet needs
Yes.
program
Yes,
passed.
I'm sorry.
Thank you.
All right, this is a long question. It says, actually, each time you call road home, the requirements changes, bad info, and many homeowners, rental properties are stuck based on wrong info given by road home. I have written several letters, spoken with many RH personnel to no avail. What or who objective person I can speak to regarding opt-out? Why were some given opportunity to opt out and others never knew anything about it? And keep in mind, the paperwork in the beginning was awful and no one could answer questions.
lot of paperwork that was not taken care of. There was rooms where they had just thrown papers, their applications and stuff back. I mean, we know that. And it seems like we're working on the road home program again, Jaime, because the questions that's being asked, because when we started doing this, all these questions was asked, and we were trying to get all homeowners to come out. We even went down to the council meeting with the mayor. She was a council person at that time, but she's now mayor now. And we had some knockdown, drag out fights down there at that council meeting, trying to get this other program, get changed to policies so that people could get their monies. And there was a lot of work that we did down there. And it seems like if y'all have money, because getting these programs, I just don't want you to get your hopes up that you're going to be elevated or that you're going to get some money to renovate, because I don't believe it's in the cards. I think that if there's money that's allocated, it has been obligated already. Because we thought about that. The money that was left over, it was all obligated. They was even putting money into some crazy programs that didn't make sense because we were still in need of getting our homes repaired.
Okay.
So,
And I think the question was who to contact. Maybe you're aware, any of you are aware of an office to contact in regards to road home funds, where people won't get to run around maybe? No?
Well, the window to utilize road home funding is closed. That's no longer an option to elevate. So, what we have now is opportunity through these grant programs that currently exist, FMA, PDM, to get involved and to elevate homes, additional homes. The state and local and federal partners through the road home program, 8,700 structures were elevated or mitigated. That's a success story. That's a good thing, right? For the 8,700, yes. There is opportunity through PDM and FMA for additional properties to be considered for elevation. Remember, they're competitive grant programs. The state does not have access to those funds. Those are federal funds that have been appropriated for use in these grant programs. It is incumbent upon the states to submit applications to then tap into those federal funds on a competitive basis. So there will be nothing that's awarded or allocated to the state of Louisiana from PDM or FMA just because we have additional things that need to be mitigated. If there's another disaster in the next 1, 2, 3, 4 years, there will be, if it's a presidentially declared disaster, some additional hazard mitigation grant program, HMGP, which is the program that funded the OCD Road Home Elevation Program. There will be additional funding made available at some point in time, but again, it's contingent upon or dependent upon a natural disaster. But we could take action in peacetime, blue sky time, through these other mitigation grant programs to elevate, make our communities more resilient, drainage projects, elevation projects, reconstruction projects, etc.
Okay, thank you. Are generators or solar panels funded through pre-hazard mitigation funds? That's a yes.
For individuals
Yes.
or for other facilities?
Individuals.
I know there are some individual mitigation measures that are eligible. I'm just not sure which ones those are.
I can answer the IMM, which is an individual mitigation method, which was for post-Katrina, and it did not cover those. It was mostly storm shutters, strapping for the storm windows, strapping in your attic, to tie your roof down. There was one for raising your hot water heater or your air conditioning system. That was outside, have it up, and it was like 6, and a door, storm doors. I think that was six of them. Yeah. It was limited to $7,500.
What are PDM type activities that would be funded? And did Louisiana get funds for the PDM program?
PDM activities, property acquisition and demolition, property acquisition and relocation, elevation, reconstruction, floodproofing. And then you retrofitting of buildings, safe room construction, but again, that's on a parish or a city level. Wind retrofit of 1 and 2 family residences. And I think that would be all that's applicable to this audience, but elevation, acquisition, demolition, reconstruction, retrofitting, or eligible types of projects.
Okay, this question says, for assistance property, it had to be 4 units or less. Has that changed? I think they're talking about rental property.
Yeah, there was a rental rehab program at the Road Home, and honestly, I wasn't in, most of my contacts went in with that.
It was a short deal program. They allocated so many dollars in that program, and before you knew about it, it was all over.
Glad that question was asked because you said it was short limit, and yes, it was. Because as I recollect, St. Bernard parishes did not expire until last year. So they had a long enough time to do things than we ever had.
And there was also discrimination with that.
Yes.
Okay, this is addressed to the guy in the middle. What are the, yes, Mr. Wyatt. What are the main challenges homeowners will face when applying for a grant?
Main challenges. Patience is certainly required, because as I mentioned, it's a long process. Patience with the system, patience with the local floodplain and hazard mitigation administrators, patience with FEMA, and the documentation requirements. So, again, all mitigation activities for these non-disasters, what we call them, non-disaster programs or competitive programs, sub-applications are submitted by our local entities. And they're the ones that are doing all of the work on the ground to identify projects that yield the most benefit or yield significant benefit to their constituents.